She was just sweeping the floor, quietly, carefully, like she always did. Her hands moved with practiced ease, her head slightly bowed, eyes on the tiles. Invisible, in a room full of noise, egos, and decisions. It was just another morning, another board meeting, another glass wall she wasn't meant to step behind, until someone opened the door and said her name. The broom paused mid-sweep. She blinked, unsure if she heard right. But then it came again, louder, clearer. "Can you come in here for a moment?" Her breath caught. The boardroom? That wasn't her place. She'd walked past that room 100 times, maybe more. Watched the suits argue behind the glass. Watched the slides, the charts, the power plays. But never once, not once, did she imagine she'd ever be inside. And yet, there she was, inside. The door closed behind her. All eyes turned. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall, it weighs. And then someone said the words that changed everything. "We want to hear what you have to say." Why? What did they see in a woman with callous hands and a name badge clipped to a faded uniform? What did she say that left a room full of executives stunned? And how did a humble janitor, just sweeping the floor, end up shifting an entire company's thinking? Stick around, because this isn't just a story about corporate walls and boardroom chairs. It's about how the smallest voice can carry the loudest truth. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Let me know in the comments. And hey, where in the world are you watching from today? Now let's get back to our story. Her name was Rosa. No fancy title. No office with a view. No LinkedIn profile with bullet points about achievements and awards. Just Rosa. Every morning, before most of the building stirred awake, she pushed open the side entrance door, the one no one else used, the one that led to the back hallways, the service elevator, the storage rooms that didn't smell like fresh coffee, but bleach and pine cleaner. She clocked in at 5:47 a.m., never late, always quiet. If you passed her in the hallway, you might not notice her, but if you did, she'd smile. Just a soft one, the kind that didn't need words. She didn't speak much, but she noticed everything. Which light always flickered in the west corridor, which in turn left coffee cups on the window ledge, which manager avoided eye contact when walking past the janitorial closet. She remembered people's birthdays, not because they told her, but because she listened, she watched, she cared. Rosa lived in a small apartment 2 bus rides away. She had a daughter in college, first one in the family to go. Every paycheck, she put a little aside, even if it meant skipping lunch sometimes. She wore the same Navy uniform every day, pressed neatly the night before, shoes that had seen more steps than most gym sneakers, and a keyring on her belt with dozens of jangling keys. But no one ever really asked what they opened. To most people, Rosa was part of background, like the walls, like the air. People spoke around her, not to her. Sometimes they'd leave crumbs on the floor, knowing someone would take care of it. She did. She always did. Not because anyone said thank you, not because anyone noticed, but because that was her way. Do the job, do it well, leave things better than you found them. But beneath that silence, behind those kind eyes, was a mind that never stopped thinking. She listened to podcasts while she cleaned. News, economics, psychology. She loved learning, even if no one knew that. Sometimes, late at night, she'd jot thoughts in a tiny notebook, ideas, things she noticed at work, ways things could be more efficient, better organized, more human. Not that anyone would ever ask her opinion, right? She was just a janitor, just Rosa. But isn't it funny how the ones closest to the ground often see the clearest picture? Upstairs, it was a different world. The air smelled like freshly brewed coffee and ambition, polished floors, glass walls, white boards covered in buzzwords and quarterly projections. People didn't walk. They moved, quick, purposeful, loud shoes on tile, phones glued to ears, eyes on screens, hearts somewhere else. This was the executive floor, where everything and everyone mattered, where voices carried weight, where titles followed names like armor, chief, senior, global head. You could hear the tension before you saw the people. Conference rooms filled with strategies and egos. PowerPoint slides that scroll for miles. One-liners tossed like grenades. Let's pivot, circle back, value add. And the boardroom? That was sacred ground. It sat like a glass box at the heart of it all, overlooking the city, 21 floors above street level. A long oak table, polished to a mirror shine. Leather chairs, always 12, never more. And a screen so large it practically whispered, you should be impressed. Inside, the most powerful people in the company gathered every Monday at 9 a.m. sharp. And if you weren't invited, you didn't go in. Not even a peek. Not even a clean. They talked numbers in that room. Big numbers. Decisions that shifted markets, jobs, lives. And outside that boardroom, just down the hallway, Rosa would mop quietly. Careful not to let the bucket squeak. Careful not to leave a footprint. Invisible, even in a place she scrubbed spotless. She saw them through the glass, sometimes, gesturing, arguing, celebrating. A world full of voices, decisions, and urgency. She never envied them. Not really. But there was something strange about the contrast. The further up the building you went, the fewer people looked down. It wasn't cruelty. Not always. Sometimes it was just the noise, the rush, the illusion that only the loudest voices held value. But Rosa noticed something. The more important the decisions became, the less connected they were to the people those decisions affected. And maybe that's why, when she finally did speak, it shook them more than any quarterly report ever could. It started like any other Tuesday. Rosa had just finished the East Wing. The sun was beginning to stream through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the gleaming floors. Her cart creaked as she wheeled it toward the boardroom hallway, the one she always saved for last. Not because she was avoiding it. No, because she respected it. She knew what that space meant, who belonged there, and who didn't. She wasn't supposed to clean it while they were inside. That was the rule. But that day, something was different. The meeting had started early. The door hadn't closed all the way, and voices spilled out, not the usual polished tones, not the rehearsed reports or confident sound bites. These voices sounded uncertain, agitated. She paused, not to snoop, just to listen, like she always did. Quiet, still. We're losing touch with the ground floor, one man said. They're not responding to the new workflow. Another voice, sharp, impatient. Then retrain them. We've invested millions in this system. And then a third voice, lower, frustrated. This isn't a software problem. It's a people problem. Our staff is disconnected. Morale's down. Turnover is rising. Silence. Then a sigh. Rosa stood just beyond the edge of the open door. Invisible but present. She leaned slightly, just enough to see one paper slip off the table and flutter to the floor. Unnoticed by the suit's mid-argument, she reacted before thinking. Muscle memory. She stepped forward, knelt down, and picked it up, and that's when it happened. The room went quiet. Someone turned, saw her, just a janitor holding a printed spreadsheet. Numbers and graphs she couldn't possibly understand, or so they assumed. But then, Rosa glanced at the paper, tilted her head slightly, and said, almost to herself, this column here, those figures don't add up. Looks like someone dragged the wrong formula. Dead silence. She froze, realizing she'd spoken aloud. Six Suit stared back at her, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. She blinked. I'm sorry, she mumbled. I shouldn't. But before she could back out, one of them stood up. Wait. He walked toward her, slowly. You noticed that just now? Rosa nodded, awkward. I used to do inventory reconciliation. Before. Before what? She shrugged. Before life got complicated. He stared at her, then at the paper in her hand. And then he did something unexpected. He opened the boardroom door fully. gestured inside. Would you mind coming in for a moment? Rosa didn't move at first. She just stood there, still holding the paper, still wearing the same uniform, still feeling the weight of all the years she had spent being unseen. The man, mid-40s, tie slightly loosened, kindness flickering behind his eyes, gestured again. Please, just for a moment. She looked over her shoulder, half expecting someone else to be behind her. But no, they meant her. Her. Every part of her said no. This wasn't her place. This wasn't her role. She wasn't supposed to speak in rooms like this. She was supposed to mop the floors after the voices had left. But something else, quiet, steady, rose in her chest. Not pride, not confidence. Truth, the kind you don't shout. The kind you carry quietly because no one's ever asked for it. So she nodded, just barely, and stepped inside. The air felt heavier in that room. Cooler, like it belonged to a different world. 12 pairs of eyes tracked her every move. One woman gave a polite, curious smile. Another raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Someone whispered something that Rosa didn't catch. She placed the paper on the table, gently, as if afraid it might break something. One of the executives asked, "You said the formula's off?" Rosa looked down, then up, and nodded. I saw it right away. The reference cell's pulling the wrong row. It's doubling the error every quarter. That's probably why the staffing numbers look off. Silence. No one laughed. No one scoffed. Just stillness. Then the woman at the end of the table leaned forward. "Where did you learn that?" Rosa hesitated. "I used to work in logistics, warehouse analytics. Before my husband got sick, I left to take care of him. This job," she looked down at her worn shoes, "was the only one that gave me flexibility. Let me keep things afloat." Another pause. One of the men, rigid posture, crisp suit, finally spoke. "I didn't know we had someone with that kind of background on the janitorial team." Rosa gave a small, tired smile. "You never asked." That sentence hung in the air like a bell after it's been struck. And in that moment, something shifted, not just in the room, in them. One of the women at the table leaned back and said softly, "You've been here how long?" "Almost 6 years," Rose replied. 6 years. 6 years of walking past this room. 6 years of silence. 6 years of watching, listening, holding knowledge no one thought to value. Until now, the man who'd invited her and looked at her like she was the answer to a question he didn't know he'd been asking. And then he did something Rosa didn't expect. He pulled out the chair next to him. "Would you mind staying for a little longer?" He gestured to the screen. "We're trying to fix something broken. And maybe you see what we've missed." Rosa sat slowly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if still unsure if she was allowed to take up space in this room. 12 chairs, 12 professionals, and her, the janitor. No one spoke for a moment. They were watching her, but not the way people used to. Not like she was furniture. Not like she was noise in the background. They were listening with their eyes. And that alone was new. The executive at the head of the table cleared his throat. "We've been trying to understand why our new workflow system is failing," he said. "Teams aren't adapting. Morale is dropping. Implementation delays, you name it." He looked at Rosa. "You said it's not just a formula problem. What did you mean?" She hesitated, then leaned forward slightly, her voice quiet but clear. "You built something that looks good on spreadsheets, but it doesn't match the way people actually work." A pause. She continued. "You've added layers, checklists, login procedures. That makes sense in theory. But in practice, they're overwhelming the people on the ground. They feel like they're being micromanaged, not supported." Silence. She looked around the room. Slowly. "I've seen them. In the elevators. In the break rooms. They're stressed. They're tired. They're scared of making mistakes because everything now feels like a test they didn't study for." Another pause. Someone began jotting notes. Rosa took a breath. "And the worst part," she looked down at the table, "they think no one up here notices or cares. The room was still. Even the HVAC hum seemed quieter. One of the younger managers leaned forward. But how do you know that? Rosa smiled gently. I listen. I don't have a desk. I'm not in meetings. But I'm there, in the hallways, outside the training rooms, in the bathrooms where they whisper complaints, by the vending machines where they vent without realizing they're being heard. She let those words sit. Then, softer, I know what it's like to be overlooked. And I think that's what your team is feeling too. Someone across the table exhaled, a long, thoughtful breath. I think, Rosa continued, you don't have a systems problem. You have a people problem, a trust problem. And if you want your people to believe in the system, you have to make them feel seen. The room stayed quiet, but this wasn't the silence of discomfort anymore. It was the kind that comes after hearing something true. Finally, the woman at the far end of the table, sharp blazer, sharp mind, spoke. You're right. She glanced at her colleagues. We've been so focused on structure, we forgot to look at impact. The man who'd first invited Rosa and gave a slow nod. This is what we needed, he said. Not just numbers, but perspective. He turned to Rosa. Would you be open to helping us redesign this? From the ground up, with insight from the people who actually use it. Rosa blinked. You mean like a committee? He smiled. I mean with a seat at the table. Rosa sat back. She didn't smile wide. She didn't cry. She just exhaled, as if for the first time in years. She was allowed to breathe in a room that had always kept the air just out of her reach. Before the uniform, before the name tag, before the mop bucket and the 5 a.m. shifts, Rosa had a different life. She used to wear heels. Not fancy ones, practical, comfortable. She carried a laptop bag, not a cleaning cart. She led meetings, trained staff, balanced supply chains, not broom handles. She worked in logistics for a mid-sized firm. Nothing flashy, but she was good, quietly brilliant, respected by those who paid attention. But life, as it often does, threw a storm her way. Her husband, Miguel, started forgetting things. First, it was small stuff. Keys, wallet, appointments, then faces. Then, Rosa. The diagnosis came like a hammer. Early onset Alzheimer's. Aggressive, unforgiving. She tried to keep both worlds going. Caregiver by night, professional by day. But exhaustion doesn't care about ambition. And love asks for sacrifices. So she let the job go. Walked away from the spreadsheets, the desk, the future she planned. For 2 years, she was his memory, his compass, his safe place. And when he passed, she was left with silence. Not just grief, but the kind of silence that seeps into cracks of your identity. The kind that asks, now what? She couldn't just walk back into the corporate world. Too much time had passed. Her resume had gaps. Her clothes didn't fit the same. Her confidence felt worn, like an old coat that didn't quite button anymore. So she applied for a janitorial position, not because it was easy, but because it was available. It offered flexible hours, just enough income. And for a while, it asked nothing of her but quiet. But Rosa never stopped seeing, never stopped thinking, never stopped being the woman she once was. She just adapted, folded herself into the background, let the world forget, because reminding them felt too exhausting. Until one day, someone remembered, or rather, someone noticed. And that tiny crack, that invitation into the room, let the light pour back in, not to make her someone new, but to remind her she was never less. The next day, Rosa came in at the same time, 5:47 a.m., just like always. Same uniform, same shoes, same cart, but something was different, not in the way she moved, but in the way others looked at her. The receptionist smiled and stood up. Morning, Rosa. The security guard, who usually just buzzed her in, nodded respectfully. Good to see you today. And when she stepped into the elevator, 2 employees stepped aside, and one of them pressed a button for her. Tiny things, barely a shift, but she noticed. Everyone did. Later that week, she passed a glass wall meeting room, not the boardroom, but close, and saw something unexpected, a printed agenda. At the top, her name. She paused, blinking. Advisory consultation, Rosa Mendez. It felt surreal. She hadn't asked for a promotion, didn't need a title, but they wanted her voice. Not just once, but again. And she wasn't the only one who noticed the ripple. Word spread among the cleaning staff, among the cafeteria workers, the back office temps, the interns who'd felt invisible. Did you hear what happened with Rosa? She was in the boardroom. They asked for her advice. It was more than just a story. It was a shift. One custodian started leaving notes of suggestion on the service log, and someone from operations actually responded. A cafeteria worker pitched an idea to reduce food waste, and HR called her in to talk. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't overnight, but something in the building had softened just a little. Doors didn't feel so heavy. Voices weren't so one-sided, and the idea that insight could come from anywhere was no longer just a slogan painted on a hallway wall. As for Rosa, she didn't stop cleaning, didn't trade in her uniform for a blazer. She still started early, still swept the corners no one saw. But now, people thanked her, people asked her, and sometimes, when she passed that glass boardroom, someone inside would catch her eye and nod, a simple gesture. But she knew what it meant. She wasn't just walking past a room anymore. She had walked into it and left the door open behind her. Not every story ends with a spotlight. Some end with a chair being pulled out, a door opening, a voice being heard. Rosa never asked for recognition. She never chased status, or titles, or applause. She showed up, she paid attention, she cared. And in a world that often rewards the loudest voices, it was her quiet truth that shifted everything. Because sometimes it's not about how loudly you speak, but how deeply your words land. It's not about where you sit, but what you see. And Rosa saw everything, not from the top floor, but from the ground, where real life happens, where stories begin. Her story reminds us that no role is small when done with dignity. That wisdom doesn't come with a title. That intelligence isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers from the back of the room or the corner of a hallway. And maybe most importantly, that the people we overlook often hold the very insight we need. So here's a question. Who are you walking past right now? Whose voice have you never thought to hear? Because behind every uniform, every quiet worker, every unseen face is a story. And maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for someone to say, "We want to hear what you have to say." So now you've heard her story. Rosa didn't wear a suit. She didn't have a corner office. She didn't speak often, but when she did, people listened because what she carried wasn't just knowledge. It was perspective. It was heart. It was the kind of truth that doesn't echo in boardrooms until someone brave enough carries it in. And now, maybe it's your turn. Have you ever been overlooked? Ever had something valuable to say, but no one thought to ask? Or maybe you were the one who finally did ask. Let us know in the comments. Your voice matters here. What would you have done in Rosa's shoes? And while you're here, if this story moved you even a little, give it a like. It tells the platform this story is worth hearing. And it helps us bring more voices like Rosa's to the light. If you're new here, hit subscribe for more stories like this one. The quiet ones, the powerful ones, the ones that remind us what really matters. And hey, wherever you're watching from, we see you. Thanks for being here.